How you doing? We're going to get started here in just a second. Everybody start taking their seats. People are still coming in, so we'll just give it another minute. There's notes and stuff in the back. You should have been up fishing with us, Gail. We needed you. Yeah, we needed some lessons. We didn't know how to get the crappie in the boat. Yeah, well, I saw two come in your guys' boat. There was two only that I saw. All right, we're going to get started. I'll go ahead and say a word of prayer, and we'll get going so we can get everything covered tonight. Father, I thank you for this night. Thank you that we can be here together in your house, and we can just come together to learn about finances, learn about retirement as we talk about that tonight, Father, and what your word says about it. I'm thankful for Ryan again coming to use his expertise and his talents to educate us and teach us. And I thank you for this time. We give you glory and honor. In Jesus' name, amen. So we're going to have Ryan from Open Advisors come and speak to us again tonight. I thought last week was fantastic as we talked about kind of going up the hill strategy to retirement, learning how to invest, ways to achieve the goals to get to retirement. Tonight we're going to talk about, I like to refer to it as the down the hill, but you hear Ryan talk a little bit more tonight. I won't steal his thunder about what retirement looks like. I usually like the visualization of going down the hill, because we use those terms in our life all the time of the over the hill mindset and that time where you're going to spend the remainder of years on this earth. And as you look at retirement is something that's different for every single person. So tonight, take that in mind that not every single person in here is going to view this the same way. Some people, they have zero plan to retire. You know, they want to work all their days. I'm not one of those people, but there's some of those people. Now, I do plan to do something the rest of my life. There's no way I could just sit around and play cribbage and golf every day or whatever you can think of. That would bore me to death. You have to have some things to do. All of us are built differently. But some people, they have this vision of, at this age, at this time. We'll talk about that a little bit tonight, what the Bible says about retirement. And God even had a retirement plan for his priest, believe it or not. We'll read that tonight. It's in the Bible. So without further ado, I'll have Ryan from Open Advisors, Ryan Baker, come up and talk to us. And then I'll come at the end, and then we'll do some time for questions at the end as well.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you all for coming again. And for those of you who were out fishing last week, thanks for coming tonight. Last week, we talked about the journey up the hill, as Shane was talking about, to that point where you reach financial independence. And we talked about retirement being different for everyone. But financial independence in the context of what I'm going to talk about has a specific meaning. It's that point in your life where you've accumulated enough money. You have enough money working for you that you no longer have to work for the money. You may still want to work. You may do something part-time. You may pursue a passion that's been on the back burner, earn a little bit of money. But you don't have to work. You don't have to wake up and go to your job every day. Sometimes we talk to clients about having the 3 bad day rule once they get to that point. And the 3 bad day rule is, if you have 3 bad days in a row at your job, you can walk out the door because you don't need it. You don't need a 4th bad day in a row. You've reached that point of financial independence where you've got enough money working for you to provide the income you need to provide your financial security for the rest of your life. So tonight's a continuation of that same journey, and instead of really focusing on going down the hill, we'll talk about that. We're going to talk about getting all the way home. And that means having your financial security, your financial independence intact for the rest of your days until you're called home. One of the biggest fears that a lot of retirees face is what? I mean, you guys probably already know. Running out of money, I heard it. Yep, that's exactly right. So how do we evaluate all of the different variables that go into this and ensure that you have a high level of financial security, that you're not living on that margin where maybe one small mistake or something happens in life that's unforeseen that derails you, and you either have to make some painful adjustments to avoid running out of money, or you face that reality where you're out of money and maybe having to make adjustments in your life that you wouldn't want to make, having to move, maybe becoming a burden on loved ones, a financial burden. Those are all things that, through the financial planning process, we want to avoid. We go to the next slide. So the agenda for tonight is a brief introduction for those of you who weren't here, or a reintroduction for those of you that were. We'll move through that and then talk about mapping out the path all the way home from the point that you reach financial independence. We'll talk about the importance of holistic planning and building that map from an independent perspective. And we'll continue to build out that roadmap and give you some tools to help you along the way. So again, the goal by the end of tonight is for everybody to have a map, at least a conceptual map built that has key milestones along the way, that's identified key variables that are in your control or within your sphere of influence, and also importantly, knowing what's out of your control. Sometimes it's as important to know what you can't control so you can stop worrying about those things as identifying what you can control so you can make those adjustments if needed. We'll talk about managing risk. Like last week, we've got at least one QR code in here that'll take you to a website for any free resources that you may need. So if you've got a smartphone, you can point that at the screen, point the camera at the screen. When that comes into focus, if you just tap on it, it'll take you to that website. The website will also be on at the end of the presentation as well if you just want to wait till the end. Next slide. So a few quick stats on me. My name is Ryan Baker. I'm one of the founding and managing partners of Open Advisors. We're an independent planning group affiliated with Lincoln Financial Advisors, which is a big, Fortune 500 company. Open Advisors has offices here in Idaho, Washington, and several on down the coast to San Diego. We've got a large team of experts in different areas, as well as support people. So our goal for our clients is really to, anytime a financial need comes up, we're the first call, and if we're not the people to help them, we're getting them connected with the right experts for that need. I've been doing this for 20 years, work with a wide variety of people, from sort of the young family next door who's just got young kids maybe, trying to figure out the basics of planning, to people further down the path of life getting ready to retire or who are in retirement, to those who need more complicated or have more complicated estates and have multi-generational estate planning needs or business succession needs. I went to Gonzaga, married with 3 kids, big age range, 18 to 1, so that keeps us busy. If there's one thing on the slide that I just want you to know about me, it's that I live and breathe this core belief that we're rewarded in life relative to the value that we contribute to the lives of other people. Those rewards might be monetary, they might be a combination of psychological, emotional, spiritual, relative to the value or the security, the benefit, protection, enhancement, opportunity, happiness we can create for other people. And so again, thank you, Shane, for inviting me to speak tonight. It's a blessing to have this opportunity to share my experience with you. Hopefully you can take something away from it and put it into your own life. Next slide. So holistic planning, the first thing we need to talk about is money. Why are we talking about money? Money is the one quantifiable common thread that connects everything in our life. So when we talk about our standard of living, from literally the clothes that we're wearing, to the food that we eat, to the houses we live in, to where our kids and grandkids go to school, to the free time we have, to the giving, financial giving we can do, to the time giving we can do, to the resources that we have to spend the time in the way that we want when we do have free time. Are we going on vacations, or are we stuck at home? All of those things can be measured with money. That's where the budget comes in. We talked about that last week, where each of those things has a dollar amount attached to it. So when we talk about preserving and protecting your standard of living for the rest of your days, we have to get our arms around what those dollars are, and they're different for everyone. So now that we've got why we're talking about money, let's talk about the process that we follow, at least in my world, for financial planning. I didn't know this when I started in the business, but it does go back to a biblical process, a macro process or sequence that we see in the Bible. And that's creation, fall, reconciliation, and redemption. You'll see it on the screen. That's, in other words, the definition of what ought to be, creation, the definition of what is fall, our human experience complete with sin and suffering, pain. Reconciliation, what can be done to reconcile the gap between what ought to be and what is. Same thing in planning. We have to define what ought to be in our future for our families and for ourselves, in addition to getting our arms around what is the financial situation we find ourselves in, before we can start mapping out what you should do to close that gap or reconcile that gap. The last piece of this redemption or will, it's that faith to follow through. The discipline, especially in investments, to follow through on your strategy, not be reactive, not get shaken and switch gears kind of midstream reactively. We talked about how that really undermines returns and success last week. I think that's one of the challenges often in this type of environment or forum, is that people want to ask, what should I do? And the answer is, it's going to depend on what your ought is, what your objectives are, and where you are today. Holistic planning also means not just looking at investments or retirement or financial independence planning. In our world, it's the connection of those things plus estate planning. That doesn't necessarily mean you have to wait till you die for something to happen. There's lifetime estate planning that we do. And there's planning that's unique to business owners and executives. Around all of those areas is a layer of tax planning. So if you haven't done it, super important to list out your goals. Dream first, and then write those dreams down. They become goals. Now you have something to follow. You have something to shoot for. It's a really easy thing for us all, I think, to let ourselves off the hook and not do that part of the exercise, because it's a little fuzzy. It's a little ambiguous. There aren't hard dollars often associated with those things. But spend some time thinking about what you want to accomplish, or what you're concerned about, or what your questions are, or what your what-ifs are in each of these areas, and write them down. And if you're navigating this path on your own, those will serve you well as a guidepost. If you're working with an advisor, that will help you get better advice, I truly believe, if you have a clear destination of what you're trying to accomplish and it's written down. Set priorities. Let's go to the next slide. All right, what do you want your hill to look like? I know several of you were in Hell's Canyon, or near Hell's Canyon last week, right? So that picture on the right is Hell's Canyon. That hill that you're climbing up to that point of financial independence, for some of us might feel like a mountain in Hell's Canyon. It might be rough. It might be jagged. There might be big ups and downs along the way. I think it's important for us all to remember that we can change that from this big scary mountain to a landscaping pile. A picture of my daughter on the left last year when she was 2 years old on her excavator, helping Dad do some backyard landscaping. We might not like the trade-offs that are involved in bringing that summit down to a much more achievable level or something that we can achieve sooner. I shared this story last week about coming home to my wife shortly after we were married and saying, honey, good news, I spent some time working on our plan today, and good news, we can retire now. And yeah, that's about what she did. She laughed. Said, okay, what's the catch, or what's the bad news? I said, well, the bad news is we're going to have to live in a school bus down by the river. I thought it was kind of funny. She said, get back to work. And I share that story just to illustrate the point that we can make changes in our lives. One of those things that's within our control is the standard of living that we're shooting for. Are we do we need enough income to cash flow to support $500,000 of annual living expenses, or could we live on $100,000? If you're at $100,000, could you live on $50,000? And what does that look like? Those are things that are largely within our control. For most people, we just kind of get complacent, or we get used to living the way that we've been living and forget that we can make adjustments. Again, we might not like the trade-offs. We might not want to live in the van by the river or the school bus by the river, but there are degrees of trade-offs that we can make there. Let's go to the next slide. Again, recapping last week, again, for those of you who weren't here, we talked about building out this roadmap. So if you feel like, if you've got a piece of paper in front of you and feel like drawing this out, that L shape with the vertical axis being dollars, the horizontal axis being time, you can see the blue dot, you're here, that's your net worth today. That's your portfolio assets today, if you want to think about it in those terms. The orange dot is that definition, is the peak of the mountain, defined by what you're trying to accomplish, defined by your goals and objectives, defined by the spending that's going to take place between that point and the rest of your life. How much do you need to accumulate between now and then to support that? Like we talked about last time, we can't just save everything for tomorrow or some point in the future. There's a lot of life that happens between now and then. We have goals. We might want to, buy a new vehicle or a new trailer, or put kids, through college, or grandkids through college, weddings, whatever those things are in your world. The more you can get written down on your map, the better job you can do building investment strategies to accomplish those goals. And we'll talk about bucketing or creating goals-based investment strategies to accomplish those things along the way. So you're not putting off living for today just so you can hopefully retire at some point in the future. There's got to be a balance. We did not fill in that blank. That's the focus of tonight. How much do you need to accumulate to support your financial independence for the rest of your life? We're going to talk about how we go about doing that tonight. Let's go to the next slide. So this is the rest of the map. I apologize if I'm standing in front of it for some of you, but the other side here, as Shane talked about going up the hill and then going down the hill, one thing I ask all of my clients is, once you get to that point, there are really three potential paths from that point forward. Path A, you've accumulated more than enough assets. You are spending down on that, but the assets are still growing. You're not even spending all of the growth or the income that your assets are throwing off. Path B, you're spending most of that growth and income that your assets are throwing off, but you're not really hammering down on your principal. And in real life, that's not a flat line, because investment values move up and down every single day. But conceptually, it's really a sustainable amount. Year over year, as time goes on, that portfolio value stays roughly the same. Path C, you're spending the growth, you're spending the income, you're spending principal, which might be okay, but that value starts to go down. And again, that might be okay as long as you don't run out of money before you run out of life. right? We want our money to outlive us to some degree. The other thing that's not really factored in here is any inheritance goals, any amount that you might want to leave behind for your kids. I know life insurance will be covered in a future session, and that often comes into play here, but which path do you want to be on, A, B, or C? I think that's an important thing to write down. And then which path are you on? That's that ought to be versus what is. Are those things aligned? Are you doing the right things? Or should you be making some small adjustments today that might move you from path C up towards path B, or path B up towards path A, if that's the goal? There are a lot of variables on this slide. I'm going to walk through those. All of those things need to be coordinated. There were variables on the way up as well. Again, in a holistic plan, all of those things get coordinated, so you know as you make a change in one area, how it's affecting everything else. Doing this work in isolation and just looking at maybe investments in isolation outside of this context, personally I think is a mistake, because you're investing for a purpose. And if that purpose is absent from the conversation, how do you know if you're doing the right things to get there, to achieve that purpose? So some of the negative factors here on your portfolio, the down arrows, WD, those are the portfolio withdrawals, the money that's coming out of your portfolio to support your living expenses. VOL, that's volatility, that's market movements. One thing that can dramatically affect the longevity of your portfolio, how long it lasts, is the volatility that takes place and the sequence, the timing of that volatility. It's much different if you have a big down market early in retirement than if you have that same down market later in retirement. When those returns happen on this side of financial independence, it matters. It's going to affect how long that money lasts. Inflation, we all know about that. Right? Everything we own, or everything we buy gets a little more expensive, sometimes a lot more expensive. So how do you factor that in? What are those assumptions? Are you modeling different rates so you can see how sensitive your portfolio is to inflation? If you're on a level income with no cost of living adjustments, like a level pension or level annuity payments, inflation is eroding your purchasing power. It's making those dollars worth less and less and less every year in retirement. Pretty soon, or somewhere down that path, that same dollar is buying half of what it was when you first retired. You're not protecting your financial independence if that's the setup. And then long-term care, LTC, or additional high health care costs especially, often comes into play in our older ages, but sometimes it happens much younger. I've got clients who have had health issues younger than expected. So how do you model that? How do you account for that? How do you plan for those expenses? Where is that money going to come from? All of these things in our world get modeled, and we can change these variables so that you can see how they impact you. There are different, family health history is a big part in this. If everybody in the family tends to get like dementia or Alzheimer's, you probably should be planning for that. You definitely should be planning for that. The one up arrow here is rate of return. That's the return that your money is earning for you, how your money is working for you. We looked at that last week as well, where the same person, if their money's not working as well as it can be, they either have to earn a lot more before they can retire, or they're, in that example, we're rolling the dice and they had a 50% chance of running out of money, where if they had just made some changes in their investments, that turned into a 95% probability of having more than enough money. That's one of those simple changes. It doesn't affect our life. It doesn't affect, how we're spending our money, how much we're working. It's just how we're telling our money to work for us. So it's an important thing to take into account in all of this. Other up arrows that might be on here are additional income, inheritance potentially from other family members that can come into the portfolio. So all of those things get baked into this picture. if you can draw this out again and start to fill in the blanks that you can fill in, and then put question marks by the things that still need to be addressed, it'll help you build a better plan. It'll help you have a higher level of financial security as you go forward. And there are goals in retirement as well, right? So you see at the bottom, like travel. Maybe it's supporting family. Maybe it's, I mentioned it earlier, not waiting until you're dead to start transferring money to younger generations within your family so you can see the benefit of those gifts during your lifetime. Let's go to the next slide. So I was just alluding to some of these things, but common potential retirement income sources before you get to portfolio withdrawals, possibly part-time income, hobbies, things that generate income, Social Security. Pension income isn't out there quite as much as it used to be, but it's still out there. Annuity income, for the purpose of that prior map, we kind of set, if you have guaranteed annuity income, we kind of set that aside from the portfolio, because that's really the thing what that is doing is really reducing the withdrawal demand on the portfolio. If you have money coming in from a guaranteed contract like an annuity, or maybe from life insurance withdrawals or loans as part of your plan, that just reduces the amount that you have to take out of the more traditional investment portfolio. That makes sense? All right. Real estate rental income, not uncommon maybe to have a rental. Reverse mortgage, yeah, Shane will talk more about that, or has talked about that. Inheritance, I mentioned that. That's a tough one to plan for. We don't know the timing. We all have an expiration date, but none of us knows what it is, right? But I think that it is something that can be helpful to have some idea at some point if there is going to be inheritance, or to the other side of this, if maybe another family member is going to become financially dependent on you. If you're going to have to help support a parent, support a sibling, support somebody else in the family, that's going to increase the demand on your portfolio. So again, it's putting as many of these variables on the map as we possibly can and making sure it's all coordinated, and making sure you're doing the things that you can do to optimize or give you the highest probability of achieving your goals. So let's talk about how much money you can reasonably expect to take out of a portfolio. Let's go to the next slide. So this is a study that was recently updated in the fall of last year, and they look at different portfolios. So you'll see that first column, equity rate weighting. So at the top, 100% equities or 100% stocks. No bonds in the portfolio. So if you think about this as equities versus bonds, so a 90% equity rating weighting means you have 10% in bonds in your portfolio. I'm not going to get into the details of what stocks and what bonds, but very high level. You can see what a safe withdrawal rate percentage is depending on how you're allocated, how much stocks versus bonds in the portfolio. I've got that middle ground, 50-50, which is sometimes referred to as a balanced portfolio, 50% stocks, 50% bonds. Not saying you should invest that way, but just for sake of example, circled in orange there. And you'll see your safe withdrawal rate starting there. If you only have 10 years, a 10-year time horizon, if you're planning to live to 100 and you're 90 years old, you might be able to withdraw 9.5% per year from your portfolio and allow room for that to increase, the dollar amount to increase for inflation. That kind of makes sense, right? About 10% per year for 10 years. Your portfolio should, hold up, hopefully. And this is a probability-based analysis. So 90% of the scenarios, you're okay. Right? There are some worst case scenarios where you wouldn't be okay. So this isn't like a guarantee, but it's a high confidence that you can withdraw at that rate. And you'll see those numbers decline as your time horizon increases. So if you are if going to the far right side, if you're 60, planning to age 100, you have a 40-year time horizon. Starting withdrawal rate is 3.2%. That's what the study found is sustainable. Again, allowing for that to increase each year for inflation. So in other words, if you need $32,000 a year, you need $1 million in your portfolio to produce that. Now, this is a rigid system. It doesn't allow for adjustments in this study. In the real world, these numbers would probably be a little bit different. How you're invested might be a little bit different depending on your goals. But you know, in the real world, we wouldn't say, okay, you need $32,000. You've a year in income for 40 years. You've got $1 million. You're good to go necessarily, because it doesn't allow for the unexpected stuff that always comes up in life. It doesn't allow for those extra withdrawals necessarily. If you start taking extra money out of your portfolio this year, 2 years from now, as things come up, the probability that your portfolio is going to last starts going down. The odds of running out of money increases. So I wanted to share this table with you tonight, not because it's gospel in terms of withdrawal rates, but it's a handy reference. Let's go to the next slide. All right. So I alluded to this earlier, but bucketing money or having money invested in a way in different accounts maybe that's attached to different goals. So you can see on the left, we're talking about lower risk investments because the money is needed sooner. So the first bucket, an emergency fund, we've talked about that. Shane's talked about that. How much money should be in there for each of us is going to be different. But that's going to be your most conservative bucket. That's probably going to be cash. One thought about cash today is if you have cash sitting in a bank checking or savings account, check the interest rate that you're earning there. Interest rates have come up significantly over the last year and a half, and there may be higher interest-bearing alternatives that are also considered safe, cash alternatives, money market funds, CDs, things like that might be a fit, might provide you the liquidity and fill the needs for that bucket and earn more interest than, 0.0 something, if that's still what your bank's paying. So it's a good thing just to look at, especially if you have a large amount of money sitting there. We want you to get the most out of what you have. And if you're not earning interest on it, the bank is, and they're keeping that. So the next bucket in this example is a 2-year bucket. And in this example, I said the goal might be a house down payment, right? We want to save enough money to have this large outlay in a couple of years. How that's invested may not need to be as secure as cash in the bank or money market cash, but it might not be as invested as aggressively as that long-term bucket where we have a long time horizon to ride out ups and downs. So aligning your investment strategy with your goal here becomes important, and it's timeline based. It's how much money needs to go out and when. We're not talking about just the regular need for income on a monthly basis in retirement. We're talking about more of the goals here. Hopefully that makes sense. The 5-year bucket might be a next step up. So as we go up, we're adding, going back to that prior chart, we're adding more stock into the portfolio, less bonds in that simple example. And then for longer term money, you probably have a higher equity weighting, a higher stock proportion of that account. And the idea there is you're taking more risk, expecting more return over time. And this system is really beneficial for our own behavior management. It allows us to say, okay, that long-term bucket in a bad market is down, but that's okay. I don't need to worry about that because that's not my house down payment. That's not my business investment. I have that already accounted for and set aside in more conservative buckets. Hopefully that makes sense. We talked about the performance a lot, the need to manage our own behavior a lot last week. Next slide. So other planning considerations that go into creating this, financial independence plan, estate planning is a big piece of it. Ensuring that your estate planning documents are up to date and accessible to those who might need them is important. A lot of times it's really easy for those things to get stale. It's easy to have people still named in those documents that may no longer be appropriate. They may no longer be the right fit to serve those roles. Laws may have changed. The document may not any longer be consistent with current laws or might not be maximizing the opportunity that you have. Ensuring beneficiaries and contingent beneficiaries are current is important. That's part of this overall planning process. Right? You may not want, an ex-spouse to be the beneficiary of $1 million life insurance policy. We've seen that happen. Part of this is also evaluating some of those risks I talked about last week. What would be the impact of a premature death or disability on your plan? For one or both people, if you're a married couple, how does that impact things? How does the loss of that income impact your journey up the hill? How does that potential additional expense impact your journey up the hill or impact your ability to stay on the hill once you reach the top? Long-term care, we talked about that. I think talking about that with family is important. It's a hard thing to talk about, but it's important for the next generation to know that you have a plan. And that's something that, kids often worry about when it comes to thinking about their parents is like, what if something happens? What is the plan? Is there insurance? There may need to be insurance. There may not need to be insurance, but there should be a plan. We should know what's going to happen, because that really, when we talk about burdens on our family, that can be a big one, where if kids are having to make those decisions on your behalf because you didn't lay that plan out for them, that puts them in a really difficult position. What would mom want if she can't articulate it, or if she can't lay this out for herself or can't share her opinion? What would dad have wanted? How are we going to pay for it? Do they have a bucket set aside for this? If we have to sell something, what would they want us to sell? What is the plan? And just, again, more communication on these things is better, and it's not an easy thing to talk about, but I think it's an important thing to talk about. And consistent with that is just consider organizing the important information in your financial life in a document for your family. Same kind of idea. If somebody else had to step in and fulfill a role, would you want them to do that in a vacuum and go, where, dad set up 10 bank accounts, but I have no idea where they are. I know there's this one, but there's some others somewhere. You'd probably want them to have an idea of where to go, who to call, what the resources are. And that's one of the templates we have available for you. If you need one, you can download it and just start filling out as much or as little of that information that you feel is appropriate. Some people choose to share that with their family, with their adult children oftentimes. Others just say, hey, I've got this thing, it's in the safe. I want you to know where it is in case something ever happens, or when something happens, you can go access the important information that you're going to need. Let's go to the next slide. So as we put this all together, I start at the bottom. The big questions are, am I okay? Are we okay financially for the rest of our lives? That's usually the first question we need to answer. And it takes some work. It takes some work laying out your objectives. It takes some work getting your arms around where things stand today, what ought to be and what is. When it comes to the possible solutions, all those things you can do, all those things you could do, all the stuff you read about, all the stuff you hear about your friends doing, may or may not be appropriate in your situation. But if you've got those first two steps, what ought to be and what is, nailed down, if you've got them written down, it's a lot easier to go to that list of options and say, okay, I think these things probably fit. Or it's a lot easier to go to an advisor and say, hey, we're talking about some of these things that we could do, but we're not sure what we should do. Again, you need to have the objectives and the observations, what ought to be and what is in place before you can really talk about what you should do, what actions you should be taking. Same thing with family. Is my family okay? We'll go into more detail on the next slide about some of the things that fall within these under these questions. And then beyond that is community. Do you have a charitable inclination? Do you want to give money or time or resources outside of yourself, outside of your family, outside of your house to causes that you care about? Following this process, the creation, fall, reconciliation, redemption, ought, is, can, will process is what allows you to go from doing something just because you thought that's what you should be doing, because you heard it somewhere, because somebody at a seminar told you this is what you should do based on your age or where you are in life, to I know why I'm doing this and I know how it fits in my picture. I think that's the moment of clarity that all of us want. And I just don't know how else to get there unless you follow this process. That's why we think holistic planning from an independent perspective is so important. There's no agenda to sell any company's product. It's let's assess what's there. Let's understand your objectives. Let's lay out the options to get from where you are today to where you want to be. And I don't care which products or services or what company they come from. I care about finding the right things and the right combination to fulfill that gap, to reconcile that gap. And once those three things are in place, it's a lot easier to stay the course because you know why you have what you have and why you're doing what you're doing. It's not out there in a vacuum. It's not, I just trusted my investment person or my insurance person and they said I should do this. I know specifically why I'm doing this and how it fits. You see the difference? Let's go to the next slide. There's a lot on this slide in this pyramid. But starting from the bottom, again, this is basic priorities. Are we okay? Have we addressed all of the things that are at that level of the pyramid, the foundational level of the pyramid? Retirement income sources, long-term care. Do we have asset preservation strategies in place? Have we evaluated what will happen if one spouse predeceases the other? Is the surviving spouse going to be okay? If some of that income is tied to both spouses living and you take half of it away, what does that do to the picture? These are all things that get addressed when we're talking about financial independence, because we're not talking about just getting there, we're talking about keeping it. We're talking about staying on the mountain and getting all the way home, not sliding down the other side, running out of money, and then what? Property and casualty is an important piece of this as well, making sure from a risk management perspective that things are properly insured. You're not underinsured, especially as home prices go up. It's a common thing for that to just kind of sit there and you find out, something happens, we didn't have enough insurance. It's also oftentimes an easy place to go get a second opinion and maybe find an easy way to save some money. Is our family okay? We talked a little bit about this, but estate planning. What is the multi-generational plan to move assets and income from one level to the next, from one generation to the next? Are we waiting until we're dead and gone for that to happen? Are we taking advantage of some tax rules to do some of this during our lifetime, if that's appropriate, and you've already checked the box that we're okay? I have some clients that come in and they're very, very motivated to help their kids out. And sometimes we have to pull back on that and say, let's make sure you're okay first. You don't want to give so much that you become a burden on them later. That's why this is, order specific. Are you leaving assets in a way that is protected from things like divorce, liabilities, creditors, financial mismanagement, and federal estate tax? It's something you can choose to do for the next generation if you want, or it's something that you can just kind of ignore. And most people are never exposed to the opportunity to address some of these things. It's pretty easy to address. It's one of the big reasons that I'm in this business. There are a lot of ways to accidentally disinherit your kids and grandkids. I saw that in my family with cattle ranch and hay operation. It's easy to avoid. It doesn't take a lot of work, but it does take intention. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on business succession or exit planning, but that's really important for those of you who are business owners out there. And then college funding for kids and also for grandkids. Sometimes grandparents helping fund college for grandkids, it's a gift to the grandkid, but it's really a gift to that middle generation, their parents, your kids, because they're not having to fund it themselves. That frees up money and capital to do other things. And then how are we addressing the community? How are we tithing? We talked about that last week in our 5-minute budget exercise. Income comes in, the first thing that goes out is tithing or giving, to the extent that you choose and want to do that. Here it's at the top of the pyramid, or the kind of the last thing we address, because it's often the box. This is beyond tithing, giving beyond tithing. This is a box that needs to be addressed after we've already ensured we're okay and our kids, our family are okay. Then we can look broader out to the community in a big way. Let's go to the next slide. I stayed pretty high level, pretty conceptual with a lot of this stuff. That's because everybody's situation is different. That's because I would not be following what I say is important if I was standing up here telling you should do certain things. In my view, you should follow a process. You should document your objectives. You should get your arms around your current financial situation. Those are things that largely you can do on your own. When it comes to evaluating that menu of things that you can do, that you can implement, that are out there, often that's where you need, depending on the situation, you may need the help of an advisor. I'm more than happy to spend time talking about any of this stuff with anyone here. If there's a link on here to schedule a meeting if you want to do that, or I've got cards in the back if you want to give me a call. It doesn't mean that we're going to work together. It doesn't mean that you're hiring me, but I'm happy to sit down and just be a sounding board, to be there for you as you're working through wherever you are in life. And one of the things Shane and I talked about, what we talked about last week and again before the meeting today, is going into this process often requires a certain amount of humility, and saying, I am where I am, and there's no judgment. There's no judgment about things that you did do or didn't do. We just are where we are. Now let's start mapping going forward. There's a reason that map doesn't have a rear view mirror looking at where we were 5 years ago. It's where are we today? Where are we going? And what can we do to get there? That QR code will take you to the website where there's some different worksheets. There's stuff there from last week as well. So please feel free to download any of that stuff and use it as you see fit. Use it with your other advisors if you already have another advisor. And that's all I've got for you today. Thank you.
We'll open up some, what's that?
Yeah, so the question is, where's the important information for my family resource? If you don't see it on the website, it should be there, but I'll double check, and if it's not there, we'll make sure it gets up there tomorrow. It's not something that we've had up there in the past. It's something we created that web page actually just for this presentation. These are all resources that we use with clients who pay fees for advice. And we're just opening these things up for you to have access to and to use on your own, use with your other advisors, use with me if you want to schedule a time. So it's not something that's normally out there, but we're making it available. So thanks for mentioning that.
Yeah, and we're going to open up at the end for questions. Thanks, Rich. And I'm glad you looked into that. Rich is an engineer, and he is going to check your details. I can promise you that. From working with him personally, I love that guy. He is on our board, and he's always got it down to the brass tacks. I'll just digress. Being on the board with Rich, I love you, brother. You know I do. We'd show up, and he'd have a spreadsheet for all of us handed out. I was like, man, the time he would put into things. So that's a ministry. I love him. You know, as I get up here tonight, I'm reminded of where I've come from in my life. And my chapter, my book that's on this, and what we're going to go through a couple more things before we dive into what God's word says about retirement and how we live out retirement. But I'm reminded that I'm so blessed to be Wirt Edmonds' grandson. My grandfather was probably my best friend. He died this last year, so I get emotional about that. He was definitely my best friend. My cousin's sitting here. There's no one like him. He was unbelievably a giving person. He lived life with a warm hand mentality. He would give and give and give. And he was valedictorian of his high school. He graduated in 1953. And he didn't really start going to school till he was 12 years old, so that's saying something. I could tell some stories about him, but I won't get through it, so I'm not going to. But I'll tell you, there's a saying that says, a smart man learns from his mistakes, but a wise man learns from the mistakes of others. And that can also be said about successes. So take away mistakes. My grandpa showed me how to be successful, and I don't have to go through all the hard ways that he had to learn to get there. You know, valedictorian of his high school in 1953, he once told me if I could just save up $100,000, he thought on his graduation day, I could live off the interest, and I'd never have to work again. He's a smart guy. That's like some of you in this room thought, if I could save up $1 million by the time I retire. When I get to retirement age, $1 million is not going to cut it. And I don't want to depress people in this room, but I can tell you, depending on how you want to live on that mountain, it gets harder and harder to live today. There was a time where I could come here to Gale. I could come here to, you know, the pastors here that have been pastors for 40, 45 years, Wayne's parents, and say, hey, $1 million one time sounded like a ton of money, didn't it? Today, it doesn't sound like as much, does it? When we start looking at the prices of housing and start looking at things, my grandpa was way off on his estimates. Would you agree? And I can tell you, when you understand retirement, you understand what Ryan talked about up there. I know it's hard when you get graphs and numbers and all this stuff, and we start getting into details. It's difficult to picture what that looks like for you. So that's why you need an individual plan. And all of our goals are different. I love it that Ryan says that this isn't something I can just come in here and tell you what to do. People have stopped me this year and last year in this class to be like, hey, Shane, tell me what to do. That's really difficult because there's a lot of information and a lot of details because it comes down to where do you want to go. Let me use an example. If we left out of the building here today and somebody said, let's go to New York, it would help us if we head east. I'm going to tell you that. It's going to help which way we turn when we leave this parking lot. But believe it or not, we could head west and get there. It'd be tough. We're going to cross some oceans. I don't even want to think about the cost. and what it's going to take. But we could head west long enough, because this is a round world we live in, and we'd get there. But let's go east. It's going to be easier. Some of you in your planning are doing just that. You leave and you don't even know where you want to go. You got to start by figuring out where you want to go. And you got to build a plan on how to get there. But you better start with some realistic things. Don't be like Papa and think that you can get $100,000 and live off the interest. Those are the mindsets that we have to get in our mind to where we want to go, what's that really going to cost us to get there, and will it be enough when we get there? What I do for a living is sit with people that constantly are telling me, I don't want to die before I run out of money. Now, you might aspire to be a Walmart greeter, but most people I meet with don't want to be that forever. There's nothing wrong with that job, nothing wrong with any job. But we want to do that. But you don't want to retire and go back to work at 85 and do that job or do anything else. So I don't care what your job is. Again, I'm not saying that, but I think of that. I think of that mindset of I see somebody that maybe retired and had to go back to work. And that might be a totally different mindset. But whatever you're doing for a living, again, there's no shame in any job. We all have to have a job. I'm just saying, when you think about retirement, nobody wants to go back to work when they run out of money. I ask this question to my clients all the time. I said, what's the likelihood that a person that's 40 years of age is going to make more money in the next 20 years of their life? What would you say? What's the percentage? How many do you think people, a 40-year-old until their age of 60, will make more money? Yeah, high percentage. I bet you it's even higher than that, Rich. What's the likelihood a 60-year-old's going to make more money over the next 20 years of life? How about a 70-year-old? How about an 80-year-old? The chances that they make more money is next to zero, because we stop working and we start spending it down. Some people can stay on the mountain and be, like Ryan said, like the A, and continue to increase. Those people are living off the interest and letting their interest. Some people can live off the interest. They've saved enough. Warren Buffett can live off the interest, right? But like we've talked about, what does God say about all this? Steve Jobs was a wealthy guy. Started Apple. You didn't know who he is. You know how much Steve Jobs has right now? Nothing. The same that every single person in this room will have. You know how much Papa has right now? Nothing. He didn't take 1 cent with him, but he left a great legacy and a heritage. You know, what does the Bible say retirement looks like? Let's just start out real quick what God's plan was for his Levitical priests. I want to take us to Numbers 8:23 through 26. There's no way I can read that, Connor. I'm going to have to turn this way. That is super tiny tonight. Is there a way to make that bigger on that screen up there, bud? There we go. Whew. My eyes were not that good. It was, no kidding. If you saw that, it was like that little. All right. The Lord said to Moses, this applies to the Levites. Men 25 years old or more shall come and take part in the work at the tent of meetings. But at the age of 50, they must retire from their regular service and work no longer. They may assist their brothers in performing their duties at the tent of meetings, but they themselves must not do the work. This, then, is how you are to assign the responsibilities to the Levites. So God's retirement plan for the Levites was age 50. So that sounds like a great plan to me. Okay? That was kind of always a goal of mine, is to retire in that range, right? I've always still had that goal, and I have a plan. I set that plan out a long time ago to get there. So, you know, at age 50, me and Rhonda have achieved that. At 45, we probably could retire today on paper. But would that be what I was called to do, what I should do? I don't believe so. But at age 50, I do plan to work differently than I do now. That's part of my retirement plan. If you read that, that was working differently. God said, they can still help out. They can still do things. I just don't want them doing this everyday job. In fact, he wanted them to, and we're going to see that. God wants us to continue to do things. And when we read God's word, we'll see that. Let's go ahead and look at Psalms 92. Psalms 92, verses 12 through 14. This says, the righteous will flourish like a palm tree. They will grow like cedars of Lebanon. Planted in the house of the Lord, they will flourish in the courts of our God. They will still bear fruit in their old age. They will still stay fresh and green. See, God wants us to still bear fruit. He wants us to still be active. I don't think God says, hey, you're good. You've worked hard. Go ahead and put your feet up, take a siesta, and be done the rest of your life. I think he still wants us to be about his business and still be bearing fruit. We shouldn't just check out. That doesn't mean we should still work the same. That's exactly what he told the Levites. Don't work the same. It's time to change. God has seasons in our life. There's seasons for a reason. When we got married, I learned that one day I thought as a child, but I was no longer supposed to think that way or live that way. And I was supposed to leave my mother and father and cleave to my wife and start a new chapter. I wouldn't keep living like a child. This week, the first time in 25 years of marriage, my wife and my 2 kids are all gone. They left Tuesday. I'm a bachelor for the first time. So you know what I'm doing this week? I'm regressing. I'm going to live like a child. I'm golfing the next 3 days, playing some games with my buddies on Friday night. I thought I'm going to live like a child this week. So if anybody wants to golf this week, I'll give you my number. I'm going. True story. Can't wait. But here's the facts of life, is I had to live differently when I got married. I had to grow up. But it's so funny. I was calling friends I haven't talked to for years. Said, we're going to go golfing. Let's go golfing. My wife and kids are gone, man. Let's golf for a bit. And so I'm having a little fun this week. But that is, again, a season. There's times for things. If I did that all the time, would I be a good father, good husband? Would I be a good provider? You know the answers. I wouldn't be. And so we same in retirement. If I just got so selfish like I'm going to be for these next 3 or 4 days, that wouldn't work. I'd get empty real quick. I wouldn't be able to fulfill the purpose that God set me out to do, and you wouldn't either. So I'm not here to judge or tell you how to retire any more than Ryan is to tell every person exactly how to do their retirement plan. But when you understand this is between you and God, you're going to see what I mean when we look at this story. We've talked about this story a couple times, but we're going to read Luke 12, 16 through 21. And he told this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. He thought to himself, what shall I do? I have no place to store my crops. Then he said, this is what I shall do. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and then I will store my surplus grain. And I will say to myself, before I read anymore, look at how many times it says I, mine, over and over. You have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, you fool, this very night your life will be demanded from you. Then you will get what you have prepared for yourself. This is how it'll be with whoever stores up things for themselves, but is not rich towards God. There's a lot here. You can unwrap this. I'm sure you could get a guy with a theology degree, which I don't have, to take you through this in detail. But I will tell you the common sense of it. God was saying, you have been selfish. This is all about you. Let me show you about you. You don't even hold your life in your hands. And you think you have everything under control. Let me show you. You don't. Your life's going to be demanded from you. When it comes to this hard issue of storing up, there's nothing wrong with storing up money for that hill. I believe that with all my heart. And I think it's prudent and wise to do so. You should be saving for it. You should be saving for retirement. Should it consume your every thought and everything about your life? No. Should it consume everything that you do in life so that that's all you live for? That would be a sad day for you, because when you get there, it will not be what you thought it was going to be. I remember thinking, if I could just get this house, that would be it. If I could just get this boat. If I could just get this Hummer. Had 8 of them. But it still didn't slick the lust. You will never have enough stuff you will never be able to have enough money to where you're going to say, I'm good. Richest people in the world still keep working for more and more and more because it's a powerful drug, greed. And you'll never have enough. So when you continue to live for whatever that goal is, when you get there, you talk to any person that's ever truly got to retirement that said, that worked out just like I planned it. That was perfect. I enjoyed every minute of it. It doesn't work out like your brain does when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s. When you get there, it's different. But people that live for the Lord and his purposes, they know where their strength comes from. They know where their blessings come from, like that story we just read. They don't count it as mine. They count it as his. And they spend it differently. They give differently. They have a different purpose with their money. You talk to people that do it that way, they live joyfully. They live differently. Money doesn't have them in bondage. Ryan has this great graph that we just saw, that pyramid where the top, that's going to be a goal. Some people, that's a bigger goal than others, but all of us should have in the mindset to leave that inheritance and to be givers. The Bible says in Proverbs that a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. In English, we would call that grandchildren. A good man leaves an inheritance to his grandchildren. You know, most time, if you raised your kids up right, when you die in your 80s, your kids are probably in their 50s, 60s to range, and they're probably pretty good financially. It's the grandkids that probably need the help. And maybe even their kids, if you got a family like mine with a bunch of great-greats and everybody getting married too young. My mom was a 34-year-old grandma. I won't tell that story here today. But that's young. She will see great in her day. She's already a great grandma, which is awesome. That's a great heritage. You know, should we be giving to others? I think the answer is yes. And what does that mean? Should we be lending to others? We talked about that before, but I want to read a couple more scriptures here. In Ecclesiastes 3, I'm going to read 13 verses here, so you have to bear through my 6th grade reading level with me. There is a time for everything and a season for every activity under the heavens. There's a great song about this if you ever heard it. Turn, right? There is a season, right, from Ecclesiastes here. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down, a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones, a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to search and a time to give up, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time for war and a time for peace. What do workers gain from their toil? I have seen the burden that God has laid on the human race. He has made everything beautiful in its time, and he has also set eternity in the human heart. Yet no one can fathom what God has done from the beginning to the end. I know that there is nothing better for people than to be happy and to do good while they live, that each of them may eat and drink and find satisfaction in their toil. This is a gift from God. Do you know tonight, I want you to know that God gave you work as a gift. It was also given to you as a curse. It was part of the curses in the garden, wasn't it? He said, you're going to toil now, and you're going to, this earth is going to create thorns and thistles. It's not going to be easy. But through that, those that serve him, your ability to toil and live through life, God just told you right there, this is part of a gift. If you can find joy in it. In the season you're in, the Bible says to do everything as unto him. I don't care what your job is. Again, I don't care if you're a mortgage guy. Again, whatever that job you may be. My daughter, she works right now at Kroger's. And what she's doing at Fred Meyer, she should be doing that to all of her ability. And she should be doing it as unto him. Same with where my job is. Same with Ryan's job. In every job you're doing, That's what God's calling us to do. And there's blessings in it. And along the way, don't stop to eat, drink, and be merry. And don't wait till you're retired to feel like that's when I'm going to live. You know how many people just think that's when I'm going to live? That's when I'm finally going to get there. Let me tell you something. Your knees are going to hurt. Your back is going to hurt. There's lots of things going to hurt. You're not going to probably want to climb that mountain you once thought you were going to climb. You're probably not going to do some of the things you thought you were going to do because it doesn't always work out exactly like you thought it was going to be. I see that every day. So enjoy the ride. Don't wait to get there to enjoy the ride. You know, there's a few things in my book that I cover that we didn't cover in Ryan's 2 weeks. And being that I didn't tell him to talk about these things, there's no way he would have. And secondly, I didn't want to put words in his mouth. The reason why this presentation is different than the last time, it will always be different because I want different people's perspectives, like I said over and over. But I deal in this arena all the time. My expertise is helping people get off this mountain because I meet with them every day and they're trying to figure that out. And what I do for a living when it comes to reverse mortgages is part of the equation, not the equation. But you know what I find a lot is a big part of the equation for most of the clients, even the wealthy ones, is how Social Security income impacts retirement. And I want to talk about that a little bit because it's going to lead into next week when Darby Heidemann comes in. And Ryan, you talked about you have a tool that we can collect this information. We do have Dara Ray coming back this year, and those My Data Diary tools, everybody will get one that attends the class. So everybody that attends the class in 2 weeks, if you're here in 2 weeks, you'll get the My Data Diary tool. If you're watching this online and if you'd like the My Data Diary tool that we're going to have in 2 weeks, and if you missed the class, let me know. Everybody will get one. I'm going to give everybody one. It's a great way to suck up the information that Ryan was talking about. So here's the thing. When it comes to Social Security income, I want to hit on something tonight because it's going to help us again with next week as we wrap up. Social Security income is very difficult to understand. I would consider myself to be an expert on the issue. I study on it a lot. I'm actually getting a designation right now, just about done. It's called an RSSA designation. It gives me to say that, hey, I'm an expert in this field. And I have software and stuff that can show you when to take, when to touch, when not to take, when not to touch. I usually say this to my clients, though. I say, listen, you tell me exactly when you're going to die, I'll tell you exactly when to take Social Security. Sounds pretty easy, doesn't it? It's just math, but not everything is that simple. When you're a married couple, maybe you have longevity in your family. I was just sat with a couple weeks ago, like I said before, and they have parents alive at 88 and 92. That's still alive as I'm talking to them. When you touch Social Security matters. If you're single, if you're married, all that different stuff. Do I touch at 62? Do I touch at 66 and 8 months, at 67? Do I touch at 70? These are things that you need to look into. When you're meeting with a financial advisor like Ryan, they're going to talk about these things. They're going to get into those. But very important stuff to look at. If you're getting near that retirement age and you haven't maximized your Social Security, you can reach out to me, totally free. I'll sit down, take you through some software, and give you some ideas. No strings attached. It has nothing to do with anything. You don't have to bring anything to me. I can just sit here and show you and put some information in, ask a few questions. You can find out, when should I touch this? I don't care if you're 40 years old or if you're getting near retirement age. You should be looking at Social Security already. Now, some people tell me, oh, Shane, I'm going to take it to 62 right now because Social Security is going to go under and I better get everything I can get. Anybody ever heard that? I hear that all the time. If the government did not prove to you during COVID that they will write checks when necessary, I don't know how I can prove it to you. You ever heard of Silicon Valley Bank? You know, all these bank stuff going under. You ever heard of a company called AIG? They went under the last downturn. They were picked up like that. Our government, these companies and these banks and all this stuff, they're too big to fail. They're too big to fail. If our Social Security checks don't show up, you have got a lot bigger problems than Social Security. America, as you know it, is done. You know how many people live on Social Security? It'd blow your mind. Now, they borrow from Peter to pay Paul. They will just get better at that. They will print more money. They will do what it takes. Now, I'm not saying the money will be worth as much as it is because that causes inflation issues. And I'm not in here to teach you everything about all the negative stuff of Social Security, but I truly believe in my heart of hearts, your Social Security check will cash every time or America is done. I think that's that simple. So if we want to go through those kind of conspiracy theorists of what could happen, I mean, I have a couple family members that love to tell me about how the doom and gloom is going to come and how the world's going to end. I read it in my book called the Bible. I know it's going to get tough at the end. We're going to be gone, most of us, okay? So we're not going to be there for that. But regardless, you can't control it anyway. So quit worrying about it. Quit putting your mind on all that stuff all the time. Social Security is going to be there for you in some shape or form. Now, what if the check is only $700? Are you going to say, you know what, that's not what I was expecting, I'm not going to take it? I'll take mine, so you don't have to take yours. Take what you get. But the likelihood that's going to be there is high, and I would say nearly impossible that you're not going to get it. Now, another question I have on the notes tonight is how do income taxes impact retirement? In my book, I really am talking about Social Security here. Social Security, when you touch it, can really have a huge impact on taxation. How much income you make, they'll tax your Social Security. Do you know that if you make, I believe today it's $42,000 as a married couple. If you make more than $42,000 as a married couple, 85% of your Social Security is taxed. Now, this is stupid because you've already paid taxes of it. It's like taxes upon taxes. But do you know if you're still working and you touch Social Security at age 62, for every $2 you bring in, you got to give one to them. So touching Social Security while you're still working, I have people that do it, and they tell me, well, it's going to go away. I got to get what I can get. That's crazy. There's so many things we do wrong. And you know, if you call SSA, Social Security, or go to ssa.gov, they're not going to give you any advice on how to touch it. They'll tell you how much you can get. They'll tell you what you can get at what age. They'll answer your questions, but they can't give you advice. They're not even allowed to. They can't say, well, call this guy and maximize it or whatever. I mean, some people mess up really, really bad. For those of you that have ever married and been divorced, you can actually look at what you can get off your spouse's income. Johnny Carson had 3 wives that were married to him for 10 years or more. They all 3 qualified for his benefits. They all 3 got them. That's crazy. That's one of the reasons why Social Security has issues. Too many straws in the drink. So I'm going to finish up with a couple other things, and then we're going to ask some questions and say some prayer here at the end. But let's read Psalms 37, 25 through 26 real quick. I was young and now I am old, yet I have never seen the righteous forsaken or the children begging for bread. They are always generous and lend freely. Their children will be a blessing. I love that scripture. God is not going to let his kids not be taken care of. Jesus said it in so many words when he talked to the disciples. He said, why are you worrying? He says, who of you by worrying can add a day to your life? I love that story. You've heard me probably talk about it before, but I love it because Jesus takes all of everything you can worry about and he brings up one example, and it's time that he gives us. He says, listen, who of you by worrying can get more time? Because that's the only non-commodity. Ryan just talked about money and how it has to pay for all these things, but it's the commodity. It's all things are finite, going to run out. Your time is going to run out. But it's the one thing that when you're on your deathbed, you're never going to say, man, I wish I had more money. I wish I. Time. He says, since you can't get more of that, then don't worry. So he's telling you that your worrying isn't going to get you a day to your life. Then I love what Jesus does. He points out and says, look over there. I think Jesus was sitting in a beautiful field at the time. I see it. You see them flowers over there? See those, the lily of the field? You see those? Even Solomon in all his splendor, all his riches, he wasn't dressed like those. He didn't look that beautiful. And even those aren't going to make it through the season. They're going to be burned up. They're done. You see those birds? See those sparrows? You're worth so many of those. You see them? They're not worried about getting fed. I'm feeding them right now. How much more are you worth to me than those birds? See, I love the practicality because I really think Jesus was just doing that. He's like, you see? So then don't worry. You notice he didn't say, don't plan. I could take you through many more things. Ryan's up here saying, let's not worry, but let's plan. There's nothing wrong with setting together a plan. And if you're in this room tonight and you don't have a plan, get one. Put down a detailed plan. If you want a horse, Donnie, put it in the plan. And go get your horse. That's how that works. Have dreams. God wants you to. Dream big. Think bigger. We serve a great big God. But in it, don't be like this rich man that says, mine, I, mine. Say yours, his. And you'll have a totally different result. And you'll be blessed beyond measure. You'll find joy in your toil. Father, I thank you for this night. I thank you, Lord, that you're good to us. Thank you that you have a plan for us to retire, to have a reprieve from the work. Because honestly, Lord, it does get exhausting. But help us to have joy in our toil and to honor you in all we do. I thank you for this class. I thank you that we can be here and we can honor you. We give you glory and honor for tonight. We just continue to want to push everything to you, for you are worthy. Thank you for Ryan that he came and gave his time freely to teach us tonight these last 2 weeks. I appreciate him more than he knows. And I just pray that you bless him in his business. And bless everybody in here, Lord, that they can take these things they're learning through these 8 weeks and apply them. And not be somebody just hears the words and just goes out of thought and mind. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, we're going to open up tonight, the last few minutes here, last 5-10 minutes for any questions you may have for Ryan or myself. And we'll do that now. Yes. He asked, do you think Tesla is a good stock for long term?
Thanks, Shane. That's not a question I can answer really in this setting, but I appreciate the question.
He's licensed, so he has to be careful what he says. I don't have to be careful at all. I think this: any company you believe in long term, and you look at their fiscal, how they make money and what they do for making and losing, that company has historically lost lots of money, and they're good at it. Could they make money, and are you betting on the future of what that industry could be like? Listen, there's people that have made great money and lost great money. I wouldn't advise anybody on any individual stock either. Should you have money in all different types of stocks and equities and things? Sure. But, Derek, when somebody's trying to get in detail and say, what should I buy in stock-wise, that is this. Red 7, baby. Red 7. You could win, but you can lose. You have a little better odds than Red 7. You follow me. So don't get in love with any particular thing. Now, if you believe with a company, like I got guys that work at Micron. They believe in Micron. They buy Micron. You see? Any other questions? Rich? I know what you're talking about. An EFT. Yeah, so I'll let Ryan answer that. So the question was, what do you think about EFTs?
I mean, EFTs are exchange traded funds. That's, a way to go buy a single, was it? Oh, okay. It's a way to go, make a single purchase, buy one share of something in this example, and underlying that one share is a whole bunch of different stocks. There are all kinds of different exchange traded funds out there. So, some are good, some are bad. There's no blanket way to, again, really answer that. Each person's situation is going to be different, but it is a vehicle to have some instant diversification as opposed to trying to buy all of those stocks. You could go buy an exchange traded fund that replicates the S&P 500, and in doing that you have shares in 500 companies through one purchase, which is an easy way to get that diversification, as opposed to trying to buy 500 different stocks and all the transaction costs involved with that.
Yeah, I was talking to myself because I knew EFT didn't sound right. EFT is electronic funds transfer because we do that all the time. ETF. But yeah, so mutual fund, basically. It's just a bunch of different investments. Again, we didn't cover a lot of that. Dave Ramsey's class gets into what these different investment types are. If you have those type of questions and you want to know what's the difference between a stock and a bond, what's the difference between having a mutual fund or an ETF, that kind of thing, sit down with an advisor, sit down with Ryan, go through different options. Diversification is huge. And I mean, to get to the top of the hill, Ryan just showed you a long-term plan that's invested correctly. You can really mess up, to be honest, a lot, as long as you don't panic and sell everything low. That's the mess up that can't come back from often. You saw in his graphs last week, those of you who weren't here didn't get to see, I loved it. I mean, you're missing 25 days in the market. Was that, 10 years, 7 years? What was that? 20-year period. It was a long time. So I see how much I already lost there. 20 years, 25 days out of the market changed the number huge. I mean, the 5 days out of the market was huge. The big days, the big returns. The big lost days is usually when people panic and then they sell. That kind of stuff is what kills you. So you need somebody to help you navigate those times more than anything in investing, because the diversified portfolios over time is going to go up. On inflation alone, things go up. Your house goes up in value. Most of that is inflation. It's not that the house is worth so much more money. It's just everything costs more to bring back. So you maybe paid 20 grand for your house, 50 years ago, and it's worth 800 grand now. It's just money is inflated a bunch in the time as well. Any other questions?
Yeah, so the question was, if you're going to pick your individual stocks yourself, should you watch that stock first for a period of time before you make a purchase decision? Did I have that right? So individual stock picking is very difficult to do and have long-term success. You have to have a tremendous amount of discipline in terms of your analysis. And on both the buy and the sell side, it's a lot easier to buy. It's a lot harder to sell, especially when things are up in value. We looked at the emotional roller coaster of investing last time. So what ends up happening for most people, you'll watch a stock, it'll go up, you'll start to feel comfortable, you'll start to feel confident, and then you buy when it's a high price. And then you keep watching it, and at some point it turns and starts going down. You start getting nervous, start getting uncomfortable, maybe panic and sell. And what you've just done is bought high and sold low and lost money. So it's a very difficult thing to do, again, and be successful long term. If you think about it, you're competing against multi-billion-dollar funds with huge research departments. And it's kind of analogous to wandering out on an NFL field and thinking you're going to compete against players that are much bigger, stronger, faster, and can inflict more pain on you than you can handle. So, I certainly don't advocate individual stock picking for those reasons.
Yes, Mark. I'll take this one first and then hand it off. So here's the thing. The question was, should you maybe buy dividend stocks that could pay a dividend instead of necessarily buying just any old stock, because that can kind of lessen the risk a little bit. So Ryan probably can answer part of this, what he can say, but I'll say this much. When you buy a rental property, you don't necessarily watch the value of the rental property every single day, week, month. You expect it to go up over time, but you buy it for the rent. I want the rents. That's why I bought it. And that's my cash flow. Much like buying dividend stock. It's like getting the rents. It might go up and down. Now, does that mean that you should willy-nilly buy it just because it could go up over time? You can lose a lot of money that way too. But if you're not interested in the value of it and you're not going to sell it tomorrow, dividend stocks are often bought like getting rent, and you're earning that term. But they can also turn off the dividends. Okay, rentals be hard to turn off the rent. Okay, but they can turn them off. It does happen. But there's what we call the dividend aristocrats. You can Google that if you haven't ever Googled it. You can go see companies that paid out for 25 plus years dividends. Will they do it for 25 plus more? I don't know. I'm not an advisor. But I will say this much, Mark, when it comes to dividend investing, there's lots of guys that do that, but I've seen guys lose great deals of money going those strategies because they still do exactly what Ryan talked about. They see the fall, they forget they bought it for rents, and they sell it. So if you're buying it for rents, guess what? If the price goes down, you know what happens to your rent? It stays, and often the yield's higher. So the more money you put in, imagine if housing prices went down, but you made more rent. That's what happens. You can actually get that stock lower, and now that you were making 3%, now you might be making 5 or 6% if the stock drops on your money. So when you put money in, you're getting a higher yield on your dollars. So honestly, the price going down gives you a better return on the dollars invested, which sounds weird, but that's how it works. So that's my 2 cents on that.
So dividend stocks. In our world, dividend stocks are part of all of our portfolios, dividend-paying strategies. In investing, in stock investing in particular, you can kind of divide it into 2 categories: value investing and growth investing. Value investing tends to be dividend-paying companies. Growth investing tends to be companies that, instead of paying out extra earnings to the investor, they keep those earnings and reinvest them in the company. So your total return when you own a stock is your appreciation, the change in price, plus dividend yield. In our world, we always have both, because there are periods in time where growth stocks outperform value and periods in time where value outperforms growth. So I know I probably didn't give you a clear answer, but that is what it is for us.
Everybody. Have a great night. Great week. Next week, I'm going to be a lot